This is about the actress. Her name is Seyi Omooba, and she was hired to play the lead role of Celie in a production of The Colour Purple. It was a stage production of The Colour Purple. For all intents and purposes, very talented young actress. She got great reviews when she had been in the Little Shop of Horrors. But after she was cast as the lead role of Celie in The Colour Purple, it emerged that there were some anti-gay Facebook posts that she had written a couple of years earlier, saying that she didn't believe homosexuality was right, she didn't think you could be born gay, and although the law of the land had made it legal, it doesn't make it right. Now, in a normal production, that might not be so much of a problem, but of course, The Colour Purple, many people see that production as having lesbian undertones. There is a particular friendship between the lead character of Celie and a rather glamorous woman that comes into the story later on that sort of lifts Celie out of some of the hardship that she's facing, and many people interpret that to be a lesbian relationship, and so predictably, it led to quite a lot of social media outrage that she had been cast in this way, and the theatre took the decision to remove her from the role. She then took the theatre and her agent at the time, who also dropped her afterwards, to a tribunal, basically citing that she was in breach of contract, or she was a victim of breach of contract, discrimination and harassment, but she had that claim rejected. Well, Michael Phillps is from the Christian Legal Centre, who was one of the solicitors who was advising and providing legal aid to Seyi Omooba, and he joins me live via video link. Evening to you, Michael.
Good evening.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to us tonight here on Talk Radio. Why is this, in your mind, an issue of discrimination or harassment and not a commercial decision based on the fact that the credibility of the production had been affected by her previous Facebook posts?
I think the thing is this, is that it's very easy to dress up discrimination as a commercial reason and say it's all about the comments, it's all about the money, whereas in fact the real reason why something has happened is because of a protected religious belief. And so for example, imagine this. Imagine I in a law firm which employs white people. We service a white community, and somebody comes along for an interview who is black, and then I suddenly discover that person is black, and I decide therefore not to employ them because a lot of my clients won't be happy by being serviced by black people. In those circumstances, it may well have a commercial implication, but just because there's a commercial implication, just because somebody might lose money, myself as the principal of a law firm, that is not for 1 minute a justifiable reason to act in a discriminatory fashion. So apply that analogy here and the comparator. So what we have is somebody with a belief in traditional marriage. She articulates a belief in traditional marriage. She's still prepared to do the job, but because somebody has gone back through her Facebook feed from about 4 years ago, and because a lot of people in the community, particularly the theatrical community, are upset that she won't recant her beliefs, and as a result of that, they will suffer financial loss. Now, in the first example that I gave to you, most people would just say, tough. You know, if people want to have racist beliefs, then that's tough. But we don't apply the same logic to this situation.
But what she has, as you just articulated yourself, is a belief. She has chosen to believe that homosexuality is wrong, and she has the right to do that. Do you not see how that would have undermined the credibility of a part? I understand what you're saying, and if the part had not perhaps had gay undertones to it, then I could see a little bit more where you're coming from. But because the part itself had gay undertones to it, obviously the audience that would be then going to see that part would be going to see it partly for that reason. There would be partly audience members that would go and think, well, brilliant. One of the reasons I love this show is because of the fact that it is with these sort of lesbian undertones to it. Well, and do you not see that would have damaged the credibility of those people wanting to go and see that part if they knew that the lead actress who was playing the part that had those undertones actually, in her personal life, believes that it's not the case. I mean, I personally wouldn't have wanted to go and see it if that were the case.
Not at all, because that's the rewriting of history that we've seen happen here. When Steven Spielberg made this movie, he didn't do it in that particular fashion. There was no particular belief that she was a lesbian character. She had previously played this part before, and it wasn't done in that particular way. The author of the book hadn't written it in that way. But all of a sudden, the way in which the narrative developed after this post came to light is that all of a sudden this is an LGBT issue. We're going to be promoting LGBT rights through this. And so what we have is that at that point in time, it was not going to be done that way because it was always ambiguous. It was all, there was a suggestion.
But that's
maybe,
the point.
maybe
It's open to interpretation. You could argue quite easily that there isn't those undertones, and that's a fair stance to take. But other people could say that it is. Who knows? The director might have wanting to play on those undertones a little bit more in this particular interpretation. That's the brilliant thing about theatre, is that you can interpret things in various different ways. That's why you can have, obviously, actors of different races playing parts that would traditionally be white parts. It's why you can interpret certain things as having perhaps more of a gay slant on them than not. That's the brilliant interpretation of theatre. And again, isn't it down to the theatre to decide whether it has those particular undertones rather than anyone else? And if they have decided that that's the route they want to go down, the credibility of that show is undermined by an actor that says something like being homosexual is not right.
The problem is that we never got to that position, because what started to happen is that as soon as this post was discovered and as soon as she wouldn't recant, at that point, all of a sudden, this particular element of the theatrical play took on a life of its own. Whereas before it was nuanced, it was a possibility, but it was ambiguous. All of a sudden, it took on a life of its own. And so in order to justify the decision that was subsequently taken, we now see a rewriting of history. And I think the thing is that I think Seyi made quite clear in her evidence that, just because somebody plays a murderer, they don't have to believe in murder. They don't have to be a murderer. That is the beauty of acting, that you have an ability to take on roles that you don't necessarily agree with. And if you are a very good actor, you can do that. Your beliefs...
Again, that to me actually underlines the problem with her casting, because if she is making a comparison that a belief in murder is the same as someone's innate sexuality, which many people who are gay who might have gone and wanted to watch this show, they would believe themselves that they are born gay, they would find that comparison exceedingly offensive, that a choice to be a murderer is being compared to someone's innate sexuality which they are born with. To me, that underlines why she wouldn't be suitable for this part.
Well, I don't think she actually made that comparison at the time. I think it's actually the tribunal who made that point rather than anybody else. So I think the beef is with them rather than with her.
Well, I agree then. I mean, because I don't think that that's a valid comparison at all. You also... Sorry, go on.
The comparator is that you don't need comparators. Actors all the time play parts that they aren't necessarily in agreement with, theologically, politically, or whatever. So somebody can play Margaret Thatcher and be a Labour supporter. That's maybe a better analogy. And so therefore, she had that ability. She played other parts like that before. She'd been involved in the theatrical community for many years, and she had been involved in situations whereby there was a possibility she might have to promote certain aspects of the LGBT lifestyle, and she's sidestepped that, and she still remained within the industry. But I think when you get to a point whereby people are being forced to recant, we are returning to the days of Bloody Mary. Why don't we just go back there and start putting people in the tower who won't recant their particular beliefs? This was not a case. There are certain cases whereby you can ask for an occupational exception in a particular role. For example, if Othello is often required to be played by a black individual, then you can make it a stipulation. But that wasn't the case here. So her case was that they didn't specify that this had to be somebody who was a lesbian, or alternatively somebody who was affirming of that particular lifestyle. There has to be room.
Why would they need
democratic...
to specify that? There would normally be a presumption that someone would be okay with that. I can't imagine anyone in a theatrical booking or booking an actor would having to say, well, by the way, just so you know, this interpretation might have these sorts of undertones to it, just in case they might have a problem with that, because most people presume that people don't have a problem with that sort of thing. So you're saying that the onus now needs to be on the theatre to inform the actor beforehand, when in normal day-to-day life people don't have a problem with those sorts of things.
What you're saying presumes that people don't, generally speaking, have a problem, and that isn't. There is a very substantial percentage of this population that believes in traditional marriage, but that's not the point. The point is this: is that if there is a genuine occupational requirement, an employer must stipulate that from the outset. And her case was that they had not.
But also, you say that it was about traditional marriage, but it wasn't just about traditional marriage. If she had said that I believe more in traditional marriage and I don't really believe in gay marriage, perhaps that would be a different matter, but she didn't actually say that. She says, I don't believe you can be born gay. I do not believe homosexuality is right. That's not traditional marriage. That is saying that someone who is gay, it's not right that they're gay. That's a little bit different to an objection to traditional marriage.
No, she didn't actually say that at all.
I'm reading the entry verbatim. I do not believe you can be born gay, and I do not believe homosexuality is right. Though the law of this land has made it legal, doesn't mean it's right.
Okay. It's difficult to unpack those beliefs in the space of a couple of minutes. But
I'm just quoting her verbatim, and that's different to what you just said about traditional marriage.
I understand that, but you've actually got it wrong. Because what she actually explained to the tribunal over the course of 2 days was the fact that there is nothing wrong in having a particular orientation, but it's when one acts upon those orientations in those particular circumstances, that's what the Bible describes as sin. And so therefore she made that distinction, and it's a nuanced distinction, but people aren't always necessarily prepared to give it the time of day. But that has always been the Christian position. The Christian position has always been that people are subject to all kinds of thoughts and desires and so on. But as Martin Luther once said, you can't stop necessarily the birds from flying over your head, but you can stop them from resting in your hair.
But then if you take it back to then, fine. I mean, if that is her explanation for it, but then you have to then take it back to what she actually wrote, which was what I said, and then why people would then go and see a production that has a lead performer in an interpretation of that production, whether you agree with that interpretation or not, that has those sorts of gay, I'll say undertones again. Then, of course, they're going to look at that post. They're not going to know from that post, well, what she actually means is this, or that actually it's a bit more nuanced. They're going to look at that post and they're going to say, well, screw that. I'm not going to go and see that performance with that particular actress in it. So therefore, it does become a commercial concern of the theatre. They're not going to know the nuance that you've just explained, are they?
Well, so basically what you're advocating is a heckler's veto. So in American jurisprudence, if the heckler shouts loud enough and creates enough of a fuss, then he can silence somebody. And that's what you're advocating, which is basically anti-democratic.
I am in a show that has that particular theme. If the part that she was playing was absolutely nothing to do with that, and there weren't people who interpreted that part to have a gay swing on it, a gay slant on it, well then absolutely, I actually would have thought, well, it's not really particularly, it's not very nice for you that people would perhaps disagree with, but I would get it. But this is a show that attracts the LGBT community, for want of a better phrase, that would go and see it. And I can understand why the theatre would say, well, hang on, we've got this Facebook post. We've got no explanation for this Facebook post. We are doing a production that we're hoping gay people will come and see. How can those two positions be merged together? I think the key to this case is the fact that the colour purple being the production that people see in that light. If it was a completely different production, Little Shop of Horrors, for instance, where there is none of that kind of interpretation, I would actually broadly be agreeing with you. It's completely separate.
I think the difficulty is that if you go down the logical conclusion of what you were saying, is that we're going to end up in a situation with, yellow stars on people and being telling them what job they can do, what job they can't do, based upon the understanding of what their beliefs potentially might lead to. So
just not jobs that they would find that would be contradictory, that would stop a commercial way of people earning their money, i.e. a theatre. It would be like someone who has got, to use sort of one of your comparisons, it would be like an actor that had perhaps made a Facebook post that could be deemed as outwardly racist, that interracial marriage, for instance, was wrong, and then they were cast in a production where the lead couple were an interracial couple. Quite clearly, the theatre would say, well, hang on, people who would be audiences would come along and say, well, hang on, how can I be convinced by this actor's performance in an interracial couple if they've done a Facebook post where they've slagged off and said it's wrong? Do you understand the comparison?
It's a false comparison.
Why?
Because it's not a protected belief. Racist beliefs are not a protected belief, whereas a religious belief is a protected belief. It's protected by the European Convention of Human Rights. It's protected by the Equality Act. And whether you like it or not, it's the law of this land that if somebody believes in traditional marriage, which as a corollary of that means that they don't believe homosexual practice, not orientation, is right, then in those circumstances that is a protected belief, and you can't discriminate against people if they hold a protected belief.
But she didn't say homosexual practice. She said being homosexual itself was wrong, as in the person themselves was wrong. And again, I take your interpretation, but someone who read that post would not see it that way.
That is what the tribunal found. They found, not me, the tribunal found that she had a protected belief. So therefore, she has basically lost. She has been discriminated against on the basis of a protected belief, but it's been justified on the basis of commercial interest. So, reversing to my original analogy, why would I not be able to discriminate against somebody who's black on the basis that my clientele don't like black people?
Okay, I just want to pick you up on something that you said a second ago, because you said that she was prepared to do the job, but the reason that the tribunal didn't find in her favour was because actually she subsequently said that when they would have perhaps gone into production, or perhaps when they would have started rehearsing and it would have been made clear to her that was the direction that the play was going in, she would have not been prepared to do the job. She would have stood down from the job. So therefore, why was she going to a tribunal for a job that she wouldn't have wanted to take anyway?
Because you have to judge the situation at the point at which the decision is made, not on the basis of a speculative belief as to what may have happened, say a month down the line. And so what happens is that in many cases, a decision is made and then people then start to try to justify what they have done. From a legal point of view, at that point in time, her understanding of the role and indeed what had been made known to her
she made the wrong understanding.
Well,
it's their right to change the interpretation or to have the interpretation they want.
Well, that's where you're incorrect. She hadn't made she had not made the wrong understanding at that point in time on the basis of the information which had been provided to her, on the basis she knew she'd been involved in this production, well, the same play in a different place before. She'd read the book. She'd watched the movie many times. She's very familiar with this story. But what had happened afterwards is a reinterpretation of history. They suddenly started to say, well, in fact, no. This is an entirely lesbian character, and we're going to do it in this particular way, and so on. Which is, this is what happens. When people get arrested for a certain offence, they start to think.
But then she could have stood down. She could have said, "Well, I don't want to do this part anymore."
At that point in time, just like many actors and actresses, she had her red lines, and many very liberal individuals, many LGBT individuals will say, well, I won't do a sex scene, for example. I won't do nudity. So having a red line in and of itself is not unusual within the acting community.
All right. It's really interesting debate. I really appreciate your time.